Have you ever been working on a project and you keep getting distracted by other thoughts or ideas? You're trying your best to stay focused, but your brain seems to keep pulling your focus away? Don't worry, my friend, you're not alone. And in this episode of the Bold Life podcast, I'll share one strategy to start training your brain to get rid of those distracting thoughts and stay focused on what you're doing so you can actually make progress towards your goals. Okay, let's dive in. When I'm in creative mode, my head is full of ideas. Like when I'm working on these podcast episodes, I'm brainstorming ideas, I'm writing notes for what I want to say during the episodes, and I'm often distracted by tons of other ideas. Ideas for future podcast episodes, ideas for courses I might make, ideas for content I want to share with my community, even book ideas for the future. In those situations, I like to keep a pen and paper next to me so I can jot down those ideas quickly, get back on task, and deal with it later. But sometimes those thoughts that come into our minds aren't really productive thoughts, right? You're working on a project, and all of a sudden your brain starts going with all these annoying thoughts and doubts. Maybe stressing about another situation, thinking about something going on at home, or a conflict with your colleague, or maybe your brain just starts going into that mental highlight reel of all the times that you've messed up in the past, all the times you might mess up in the future, especially when you're feeling a bit insecure or your confidence might be down, reminding you of all your mistakes or how things might not work out. Thoughts like, what if I try this and it doesn't work out? What if I mess up? What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail? What if I mess up and everyone's mad at me or I'm not smart enough? Our brains love to remind us of our mistakes from the past and how things can go wrong in the future, especially if what we're working on or what we're trying to focus on challenges our confidence a little bit. Maybe you're working on a new project you've never done before, and your brain goes into that spiral of doubt, insecurity, and criticizing yourself. Or maybe you're trying for a new promotion at work, and while you're filling out your application, your brain starts going with all these what ifs and all these doubts and all these insecurities. And those thoughts can really throw us off track, just as much as when you have great ideas for other projects. Writing these negative thoughts down can work, it can help get it out of your head, but journaling in the moment might throw off your game and might kind of throw off your mental energy or throw you off track. So instead, here's a strategy I love to use when that negative highlight reel or those negative thoughts start to pop up and throw me off course. I call it the mental bookshelf strategy. Here's how it works. What I want you to do is close your eyes and picture a shelf. It works best if you picture a shelf that you're really familiar with. I like to pick one that I have at home in my living room. So I close my eyes, I picture the shelf, I imagine everything about it, all the details that I can think about. My shelf is brown, it's kind of like a fake wood. I picture where it's sitting in the corner of my living room, the color of the wall behind it, it's this really bright blue that I love. I picture what's on the shelf. Mine's a mix of books and some family photos, but also some little knickknacks and that type of thing. I picture everything else I can see when I'm looking at that shelf. What you're trying to do here is make that image of the shelf as vivid as you possibly can, as clear and realistic in your mind as you can make it. Then, what you do is imagine yourself picking up that negative thought and you put it on the shelf. When I do this, I imagine my thoughts as like little cartoon thought bubbles, but you might imagine your thoughts a little bit differently. However, you picture your thoughts, you picture that bookshelf, and then you picture yourself picking up that thought and putting it on the shelf. Whenever that thought comes back again, and it will, because our brains love to go back into that spiral of doubt and insecurity, especially like I said, if you're working on something that you're not totally confident with, or something that's new to you, or something that is a bit of a risk or outside your comfort zone for your brain, those thoughts are going to come back. That's totally normal. We don't want to try to totally banish the thoughts or block them completely, because that actually takes a ton of energy and isn't very effective. What we want to do is train our brains to acknowledge that these negative thoughts happen, but we don't need to focus on them in the moment. We can imagine ourselves picking them up and putting them on that shelf to either deal with later, if you decide that later on you want to journal about that thought maybe, or spend some time reflecting on it, or just leave it there, because sometimes thoughts are just thoughts. Why this mental shelf strategy works really well is our brains are great at imagination like this. I've shared before on the podcast about how they've done research on high level athletes like Olympic swimmers, where they've hooked up these athletes to a whole bunch of monitoring systems and they monitor changes in their body when they're picturing themselves doing their activity. So they monitor swimmers where they're imagining themselves taking the perfect stroke. And what they find is that for athletes, their bodies respond as if they're actually swimming. So their muscles contract, they release the same neurotransmitters in their brains. They have the same physical response in their bodies, changes in heart rate, perspiration, all of these things change as if they're actually swimming. Because in these situations, our brain isn't very good at distinguishing imagination from reality. But we can use that to our advantage, just like these athletes do when they're trying to do their mental training exercises. When those negative thoughts, those intrusive thoughts, those annoying thoughts, those thoughts of doubt, insecurity, the low confidence pop in, we imagine ourselves picking them up and putting them on that bookshelf. And this is training your brain, like I said, to acknowledge that even though these thoughts happen, we're not going to be distracted by them right now. I'm not going to let that negative thought about how I might fail or how this might be a giant disaster throw me off track from working on the task. Maybe, like I said, you want to pick up on that thought later, take it off the shelf, analyze it, but sometimes it is also okay just to leave those thoughts there. We fall into this pattern of believing that our thoughts have some deeper meaning or that they're totally 100% true, and that's really not the case. A lot of thoughts are just thoughts. They just happen, and we really don't need to analyze every one or accept that all of them are true. So sometimes those thoughts and doubts aren't things that we need to spend a ton of time thinking about. We can pick them up. They don't help us. They're not beneficial. So we stick them on the shelf and we can leave them there. Or, like I said, we can unpack them later when we have time. What we don't want is for those thoughts, those doubts, those what ifs, the negative thinking, the judgment, that inner perfectionist, that inner people pleaser to throw you off track when you're working on something, especially those thoughts, like I said, full of self-doubt, criticism, and perfectionism. It's really easy to get distracted by those thoughts. When we can imagine that bookshelf and imagine ourselves picking up that thought and putting it away, it tells your brain, this is not something I'm focusing on right now. This is not a priority for my brain. I'm going to put it away for later when I can deal with it, or leave it. The next time you find yourself getting distracted by these annoying negative thoughts, practice this strategy. Pick it up and put it on your shelf. This episode is brought to you by my free workbook, Your Daily Productivity Checklist. In this workbook, I'll show you how to use neuroscience-based strategies to set your workday up for success so you can get more done while feeling less overwhelmed. You can snag your free copy at drnicolebyers.com/checklist. There you have it. One mental training exercise you can start doing today whenever you're getting distracted by negative thoughts. Remember, thoughts are just thoughts. Our brain puts a lot of weight into them and often believes they're true. But more often than not, they're not 100% true anyway. And we don't need to put a lot of weight or value into all of them. Some of those thoughts can be put on the shelf to deal with later, or just left on the shelf because they don't serve you and they hold you back from your goals. Thanks for listening. I'm Dr. Nicole Byers, and this is the Bold Life Podcast.